Just for the recording, this is the Monday, June 22nd meeting of the Youth Education and Libraries Committee for Community Board 8. And we will be having a session entitled Getting Real on Racism, Learning from Our Students as Our Teachers. And we have 3 students from LaGuardia High School who will be sharing their thoughts and perceptions and insights, into the subject of racism. It is now 6:24, so we'll have a few minutes that will be quiet. We don't provide music as we're waiting to go into the live session. In a couple of minutes, I suspect our speakers will be joining us, so we may have a brief conversation with them. But for those of you who may actually be listening to this recording, I just want to let you know what to expect. Hi, Ariel. Can you hear me? Are you on mute? Is that Jarrett? That's Jarrett. Jarrett, nice to see you. Nice to see you in person. Oh, I saw Ariel a second ago. I'm not, is she still with us? Let me see. Maybe not, I'm not sure. Anyway, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm ready to speak and just.
Okay. You're all primed?
Yep.
Good. I want you to know, I always start with a little informal conversation with whoever shows up. But I want you to know, I will not forget that first conversation we had.
I think Ariel's here now.
Yeah, Ariel? Are you with us? There you are.
Neat.
Nice to see you, Ariel.
I was muted for a second, but I'm here.
Not muted forever. I've learned that about you. Oh, let's see. It doesn't matter. Let me just see here. Oh, there I am. Well, to tell you more than you need to know, I do have Oreo, our puppy, in my lap. Let me see if I can get you to see Oreo. Oreo.
Oh, cute.
He is about 10 pounds, and he's definitely cute. You're walking down the street. Oh, that's a cute dog.
All dogs are cute.
Yeah. Oh, I spoke briefly with Jonathan. And frankly, there wasn't much to cover, but I did spend just a minute on the. I'll let him tell me. You guys are managing your flow and sequencing and so on. We transition to Q&A. We're going to invite people to submit questions, by chat, and then actually Will may look at them, I may look at them, what have you. And I guess they're probably going to be pretty much a jump ball unless they direct it specifically to one of you, in which case you can figure out who wants to pick it up first.
Okay.
So what's new since I saw you both last? Actually, I never saw you both last. I did see you both. I saw you on the video, but in any case. What's new? What's happening?
I'm just preparing myself for graduation and stuff now.
Like the graduation videos and stuff like that.
Oh, when does that happen?
I think we had to record a video of us in our caps and gowns and submit it by yesterday, I think.
Mhm.
Oh,
But the graduation's on Thursday.
oh, wow. Big transition. Exciting. Congratulations.
I'm so ready.
Ah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ready.
Jonathan.
Hello.
Why, there you are.
I was here, but I wasn't allowed to unmute for a minute.
Oh, okay.
But I'm unmuted now.
We've gotten past that. We're almost up to 6:30. What I'm going to do, just so you know, is I will open with a sort of I'm going to call it a professional ramble. What I really mean is a few minutes of conversation to let other people show up. But I do like to at least begin the conversation as people show up, you know, sort of at the appointed time.
Got it.
I'll try to
Sounds
embarrass
good.
you all if I can, but you know, I'm not sure you guys embarrass so easily. Well, it is now 6:30. I'm going to pause for a moment, let a few more people sign in, check in. But having said that, I think I'll just begin with a few comments for those early arrivals. And trust me, I'll go in tangents. The first tangent is I think I said this to you, Jared. I discovered I've been a management consultant my whole career. I overdosed on academics way back when, and that's way back when. We're talking 4+ going on 5 decades. Management consultant, traveled a lot. But 10 years ago, a little over 10 years, about 12 years ago, I got the opportunity to, hey, Rami, good to see you. Oh, you're on mute. You can, oh, I don't know. Actually, Will's controlling the mute, so I guess he unmuted you. I'm not sure. But I discovered about 10, 12 years ago that I'm really a teacher. And I do love it, but my teaching is very much interactive. So, you know, you all are sort of locked and loaded and you know, prepared and have thoughts about what you want to say and so on. But if you weren't, I would still engage you in the conversation. And as I said, Tata, oh, Billy, welcome. Ryan, Alex, thank you for joining us. Julia, yes, we have a few more people. I think they're probably getting admitted from the waiting room. So we'll just have a little more informal chat for about a minute, then we'll kind of begin the session. I'm going to say hi, Julia. Nice to meet you. Thank you for joining us. I'll give people just another few seconds, and then I'll at least begin the evening session and conversation. And I am going to say, I've been looking forward to this, and I think it is really special, at least for me, and I think for those of you who are joining us, to hear from our presenters, Jonathan, Ariel, and Jarrett, speak on this question of racism, you know, and the idea of getting real on racism and what it means to be an ally in the whole arena and issue of racism. And as Jared has already discovered, I tend to wander into a little anecdote. So here's my anecdote for the moment. It's like off the top. Actually, probably all of us have various kinds of experiences and background. And I came from a community that was affluent and had only one Black family in the community. So my first real immersion into a biracial situation is when I went into the Peace Corps following college. I couldn't make sense out of the Vietnam War, and I was really kind of thrilled to have the opportunity to go in the Peace Corps. And I was assigned to work with coffee cooperatives in Ivory Coast, West Africa, which is probably one of the best things I've had the opportunity to do in my life. For reasons that I wouldn't probably have asked for if I'd known what the experience was going to be like. But it really was, you know, moving into a different arena where I frankly didn't know what expectations to have. and I'm just going to share one kind of weird little anecdote out of that I did share with you, Jarrett, which is about 3 months into that experience, one night, I dreamed with some frequency, not every night, but I remember the dream I had this particular night. And what was strange about it was I recognized people that I knew from the local town and community. I was upcountry in Ivory Coast on the Liberian border in a town called Tulepla. But what was strange was I recognized them, but they did not appear black in my dream. And I just, as I woke up, I found that pretty curious. So that day, as I went out and about and visited and interacted with some of the people who'd actually been in my dream, what I noticed, and I'm not going to try to make sense of this, I'm just going to report what I observed. Ivory Coast gets a lot of sun, trust me. It gets pretty warm most days. And what I noticed was what my brain was picking up as I looked at them, what happened not to be their blackness for whatever difference that makes, but actually the white highlights that a very bright sun makes on a face of perhaps anybody. But the more important insight, frankly, that I'm not sure that's an important insight. The more important insight for me is I notice race, at least in my unconsciousness. I notice blackness or perhaps Latino, brown, light skin, less light, darker, what have you, until I get to know somebody. And then that piece of my consciousness seems to evaporate, where I'm much more just in conscious and aware of the experience of being in a relationship with a particular person. In any case, it's now 6:35. You've had your informal introductory comments, so we're going to delve into the real purpose of the session. And as I began to say earlier, I was introduced to our trio of speakers. Thank you to Debbie Teitelbaum, who was, as some of you may know, co-chair of this committee last year. And she mentioned a really wonderful event that I could access online called the LaGuardia Town Hall. And that was featured, among others, our speakers this evening, our three teachers who happen to be students at LaGuardia High School, speaking on their personal perspectives on racism and how to relate to it and think about it and be around that issue. And I'm just going to briefly say, I don't know. I mean, there are many issues that are important. And in this day and age, there's no shortage. I think education is important. I think access to opportunity is important. I think obviously dealing with the virus is important. But there's no issue that's been sort of more long-standing in our history. And frankly, I'm going to say unresolved, but the source of tension and a source of actually great injustice in many respects. And around rest, it's not for me to offer my point of view, but I will offer this one thought. Because I've thought about it. I work with an organization, a nonprofit that deals with ex-offenders coming back in the community. And the more I know about that system, it tries to do a good job. It tries to do well, as our police do. But there is not a small measure of injustice in the way that system operates. And that itself is an understatement. So having said that, I'm going to defer to our three speakers who are in the order in which they're going to speak. I believe Ariel is going to speak first. Ariel Clark, who at LaGuardia High School is the LaGuardia Activist Club president. Second, I believe it'll be Jonathan Green, who's president of the LaGuardia High School Student Association. And third, it will be Jarrett Benjamin, who is the LaGuardia Student Equity Leader. And after that, and as they speak, I invite all of you to put questions in chat. We're gonna at least launch the chat session, the Q&A session, by looking for your questions and what you're particularly interested in and how this may relate to you. But having said that, I'm going to turn it over to Ariel. Ariel, thank you. Jonathan, Jarrett, thank you for joining us. Thank you for coming to help us learn and think about this most important and sensitive and timely subject. It's all yours.
Thank you. Hi. So in the wake of everything that's going on right now with the fight against racism and the fight against racial injustice and for racial equality blazing not only throughout the country, not only throughout the US, but quite frankly throughout the world, is very worldwide at this point, in very many very different countries. I suppose this brought into question exactly how to become an ally and what an ally is, and how to become a true ally. So very simply put, in a very truncated version, only 4 words, as an ally, to be an ally is to be active, not passive. As an ally, one should always consistently call out racism wherever it is seen, wherever it is very prevalent, and even in places where it may seem very under the surface, because racism is very institutional, it can be very subtle, it's very generational, and it's often a thing that many people are brought up believing. Because your opinions become very set as you grow older, very set as you become more accustomed to having them, more accustomed to thinking a particular way. So it's very important to break the chain and actively encourage others to combat racism and actively combat racism yourself. So as an ally, that involves not only signing petitions, not only donating to organizations that support, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement, or for example, the Minnesota Freedom Fund, but it also, very simply put, has to do with educating your family and friends, educating yourself, actively challenging the racist institutions that you encounter on a daily basis, actively having conversations, being willing to have the difficult conversations with your family and friends who may have racist tendencies, who may have racist mindsets, racist viewpoints, and to protest when you are able to, if you are able to speak out, if you have social media, to speak, quite simply just speak out wherever, on any platform that you have. Being a passive ally or a very silent ally, or only speaking up when you see another Black life being killed, another Black life being stolen, it's very contrary to what the true nature of being an ally is, which is to uplift minorities and to provide a platform for them to speak up about what's going on, to amplify their voices. There are no ifs and buts to racism, and it's very easy and very simple to ignore sensitive content that is seen on the news or on any videos, simply because it might make you uncomfortable, but this is a very uncomfortable conversation to have, and that's completely okay. It's okay for it to be uncomfortable. It just needs to be had. It's very important for it to be had, for this conversation, a very interactive play and amplifying and listening to the voices of people of color. It's very easy to only see what you want to see, to only think what you want to think, to have your thoughts very filtered out, because as humans, we're very stubborn in our beliefs. But it's also very important to educate yourself, to educate your family and friends, and there are a bunch of ways in which you can do that as an ally. For example, one thing is just to know the basics, and that might seem very simple or very silly to not know, but it's very important to refresh your memory of them, refresh what they are, exactly what they mean. For example, what's racism? What's a racial stereotype? What's racist policing? What's institutionalized racism? What's racism that's under the surface? What's a microaggression, and so on and so forth. So that when you further and go on out in society, you know exactly how the institutions that you interact with on a daily basis have to do with those specific terms, how your own, maybe potentially one's own subtle race, maybe because racism can be very subtle, can be very, you might not even realize that one has racist tendencies. For example, if you are looking at a certain film and seeing, for example, a Black character, a Black woman, and you automatically expect her to be angry or automatically expect her to be very sassy and very roguish and very raunchy. That's a stereotype. And it's very important to acknowledge that that's a stereotype so that you can make sure that you avoid stereotyping as a whole. And there are many different ways to educate yourself. And one important thing is to make sure that one isn't solely relying on people of color to educate you as an ally, as someone who's going to further uplift the positions of minorities in society. For example, the internet is very widespread. There are many books that on Black experience, on an authentic Black experience, not just whitewashed history. For example, with Black Lives Matter, there's Moonlight, there's The Hate U Give, there's When They See Us. There's many, many different sources that one can take to educate themselves on the Black experiences, on the experiences that society is constantly and systemically ignoring and pushing down under the surface. And if there are friends and acquaintances that are willing to talk to you about their experiences as people of color, listen to them. As an ally, your main goal is to act as a conduit for the voices of people of color, to act as an amplifier for the voices of people of color, which doesn't mean that the voices of people of color are of any less value or that they're of any less importance, which is exactly to the contrary. But that what it means is that as an ally or as a white ally, simply due to the fact that institutionalized racism exists, one's opinions as a white ally are valued more as in society than those of people of color, than those who may be speaking out about it, but may not, but aren't being listened to by society, simply because institutionalized racism exists and systemic racism exists as a whole. There's no room for being shy as an ally. It's like, as I said before, these conversations are very difficult to have, and they're very uncomfortable to have, but they're very important to have. And they're very essential to have, to educate, to talk about your family, to talk with your family about what racism is and what's going on in the world, and the ways in which their attitudes and their behaviors might subconsciously play into those racist infrastructures. And simply due to one's voice being valued more in society than another's, than the entirety of another race's, that's a very simplified version of what white privilege is, of what one's privilege is. And when it comes to acknowledging one's privilege, which even in the case of Black Lives Matter, even includes non-Black POC allies, is just putting yourself in their shoes. For example, with any specific situation or any specific circumstance, put yourself in their shoes and wonder, if I was in that situation, would the outcome have been the same? Would the same thing have happened to me? Would I have gotten away with my life intact? Would I have any unnecessary conflicts? Would I not have any unnecessary conflicts? And if the answer as to those questions is a reflection of one's privilege, is a reflection of how society institutionally helps better you up more than the positions of other people of color, which again can be very subconscious. You may not realize that one has privilege, but it's also very important to realize that privilege doesn't necessarily mean that your life isn't hard. It just, as a white privilege, doesn't necessarily mean that your life isn't hard. What it means is that your life that you aren't being systemically or institutionally oppressed because of your race, because of your skin color, because of what you look like. And that's very important to realize, because I know that acknowledging one's privilege can be a very, very personal and very deep and very introspective thing, but it's very important. And the only way for you to amplify the Black voices in society is for you to realize that your voice in society, and that is completely unfair, that as a white ally or as a non-Black POC ally, one's voice in society is valued more than others. And once you realize that, it's very easy to branch off into amplifying Black voices and the experiences of people of color. So additionally, in terms of that entire circle, as an ally, one can't only support the lives of people of color when it's a trend, or when another Black person is being killed, or when another Black person is being beaten, or when another Black person is being oppressed or is facing a racial slur. An ally shouldn't only be active in fighting racism when you see your friends being active in fighting racism, or when you see your friends who happen to be people of color experiencing those same issues. One person being oppressed is oppression as a whole. One person is too much, and it's only reflective of the entire trend of what's going on, not only nationwide, but also worldwide. So since people of color never stop being people of color, one's race never changes, Black people never stop being Black, one's allyism, so to speak, or one's position in fighting against racism should never stop. It shouldn't stop when the roads are empty, when the protests stop. It shouldn't stop when the social media feeds change from being protest oriented or Black Lives Matter oriented to just personal pictures or selfies. One should always consistently call out racism, actively call out racism all the time. Every moment that it is seen, every moment that it is not seen, but always happening. And once again, those things may not be very prevalent. Racism ranges from a very prevalent scale, from a very noticeable scale, to a scale that's very under the surface, very subtle. For example, there are various microaggressions that come hand in hand with racism. For example, with seeing a person who might have natural hair, and if one's immediate perspective on them is that they didn't take as much time taking care of themselves, or dressing up nicely, or that their features or the way the way that one dresses in accordance with one's culture means that if they believe that means that they are less professional than others. That's a very, very subtle thing. It's very subtle to the people that are thinking of them, but not as subtle as it may seem to the people of color that it is going against. And racism in any form, small or large, is harmful, and it's very horrifying and terrible. And all people are people. All people deserve rights, and all people deserve the right to live, deserve the right to walk out on the street without worrying about whether that will be the last time seeing their family and friends again, if it'll be the last time seeing their home again, seeing their community again, or seeing themselves again. Everyone faces the after effects of racial injustice, whether it be through one subconsciously benefiting off of institutionalized racism, or being pushed below the ranks because of it. Everyone in some way has to do with this entire big world that is racism. So constantly, everyone as an ally should constantly encourage family and friends to call out racism, to combat racism, to speak out against racism in any way or shape, shape or form that you can. And that's also has to do in large part with voting. Not only voting in terms of national government, in terms of president, but also on a very local, regional, and state scale. Also, these are the people these are the governments that are electing your judges, your legislators, your leaders, and one's vote is very influential on who is influencing what in society on a larger scale. One's vote is never meaningless, and is especially not meaningless when it comes to fighting against racism, when it comes to combating racism. And last but not least, what's most important about being an ally and combating racism and fighting racism is being very introspective. It's a very personal process, not only having to do with acknowledging one's own privilege or one's own benefits in the world of institutionalized racism, but also just even challenging your past actions, even challenging your past ways of thinking, your past methods of thinking, which once again can be very, very subtle, can be very, very unnoticeable to the person that is thinking them. But once again, they aren't, as I said before, they aren't as noticeable to the people of color that it's going against. So looking within oneself, being very introspective, has to do with challenging one's past actions, challenging one's method of thinking that one might have been thinking for a long time. Opinions become more set the more you believe in them. So as an ally, one should always look at past decisions with the lens of, could what I have said been potentially harmful? Or in what way was what I did or what I said or what I was thinking potentially harmful? And once an ally realizes that and comes to terms with that and acknowledges that, allies have to not be too prideful in correcting themselves and acknowledging that that way of thinking is wrong, and acknowledging that that way of thinking is harmful, and that way of thinking is very prejudiced. And realizing your past actions, realizing how they come into play with your present actions, and using both factors to determine how you will move on going forward, how you will move on and change your behavior and change your thinking, and being more active moving forward so that you can be sure to never do it again.
Thank you, Ariel. I defer to you all.
Thank you. I was unable to unmute myself again.
Sorry about that. Just raise your hand if you ever mute and can't unmute.
All right. Thank you. So I want to start by touching on something that Ariel said, that the most important aspect of being an ally is being active. You cannot be a passive ally. It's being passive and being an ally is an oxymoron, because to be an ally, you can't just not be racist. You need to be actively anti-racist. You need to use your privilege and your platform to dismantle the systems of racism and white supremacy that exist in our society, and find the biases that you might hold or that people who are close to you might hold, and challenging them on that. So yeah, being active is really the most important, really I guess the overarching aspect of being an ally. You need to be willing to have conversations that might be uncomfortable with people in your life, people you might love and respect. Because if you have anyone who is white has benefited from white privilege in some way, shape, or form. And it's crucial to acknowledge that and work to dismantle these systems that exist. We all we all have some kind of biases. They might be unconscious. We might not even know that we have them, but part of educating yourself is finding those biases that you might have, that people you know might have, and challenging them and working to get rid of them. You need to take it upon yourself to educate yourself. It's no one's obligation to educate you. It's your obligation to educate yourself. And like Ariel said, you have the internet. You can pretty much every piece of information that's ever existed is at your disposal. There are lists of movies and documentaries to watch that can teach you, lists of books to read that are so easily accessible. So you need to take that step yourself. You need to find these resources that are available to you and use them. And after educating yourself, then take a look at your own life and see if something you've learned, something you saw, applies to your life or applies to someone you know. And then taking that active step of working to dismantle that. And another thing that Ariel said that I want to touch on is, unfortunately, because of the systemic racism in our society, sometimes white voices are listened to and amplified more than the voices of Black people and people of color. So you need to use whatever platform you have to advance this agenda of anti-racism. You can't just, like, that you can post on social media, you can donate to, you can sign petitions and you can donate, you can go to protests and you can educate yourself and have these conversations with people in your lives. But it's important to do all of them, not just one, not just what's easy, but what's hard. And I think something else that's crucial is being able to admit to yourself that you might be wrong about something when you've learned some new information, you've learned something new. You can't be too prideful to admit I'm wrong. You can't get defensive when someone else calls you out on a microaggression you might have committed, or something racist that you might have unconsciously said, or a racist activity you might have participated in. You can't be too prideful to admit that you are wrong. And it's an important first step in being an anti-racist. We all have been conditioned with certain biases that might not even have been our choice, but what is your choice is to find those and work against them and work to rid yourself of these biases, because they exist and they are so prevalent within, and often so unconscious that we don't even know we have them. It's not enough to just think to yourself, well, I'm not actively being a racist, so therefore I am an anti-racist. No, that's just not how it works. You need to be active in the other direction. Being a bystander is just something that's not acceptable. You have an obligation to speak out and do not just some of what you can, but all of what you can to work against racism, work against white supremacy. Yeah.
I don't know if I should start speaking or not. Should I? Okay, I'm gonna go. So hi everyone, my name is Jared Benjamin. I am a student equity leader at LaGuardia High School. And so just a little bit about my story and what I've been doing this year and stuff like that. In this position as a student equity leader, I worked with Superintendent Vivian Orland and also many people in the Manhattan School District. And I basically participated in different conversations about my experience as a Black and Brown person in the public school system. And for the past 2 years, I've been working to find different solutions to have my voice and other Black and Brown voices in the school be heard, and to educate people about my lived experiences, so that students in the next and upcoming years can have a better experience than that I may have had and that other students may have had within my same age group. In terms of like different like racial experiences I've had, I went to middle school in Corona, Queens, Louis Armstrong Middle School, and that school prided itself on its cultural diversity and stuff like that, and I could definitely see it. Like I saw a lot of people who looked like me, and I also saw people who didn't look like me, and I never really experienced any problems with race until I got to high school. Going to LaGuardia, which is a very predominantly white high school, it was very apparent to see that like I wasn't in a school where I was necessarily the majority, and I had to kind of like really fend for myself and find a group of people that could understand the things that I was going through. And it was very challenging, especially being someone in a school of the arts, to really feel that like I had a place in that school and that my voice and that my talents were really appreciated. Because even if I got like a role or something, or I was getting a solo, or even like college auditions and stuff, because I'm a kid going into theater, it's really hard to think that did I really get this role? Did I really get into the school because I'm actually talented? Or did I get in because I'm a person of color and the school or this um, program kind of performance needed to fill some type of diversity quota? And I think that we had to take certain steps to kind of diminish the stigma and to really help people of color realize their worth and their talent as an individual. And so today, a main point I want to talk about in terms of allyship is to consider all the things that you may feel like you're doing as an ally, and to really be introspective and question if the things you're doing are actually helpful in the movement, or if you're just not making any noise. So for starters, saying things like I don't see color as a way to kind of say that, oh yeah, like I'm not racist, I don't think color should matter. I think that we should move from a mentality that we don't see color to a mentality where it's like I see that you may be different, but I appreciate your blackness, I appreciate where you come from, and I'm going to continue to educate myself about your different lived experiences so that I can better help you move forward, instead of having all these different institutions and systems that are so against you. Also, saying things like all lives matter, I think you have to understand that all lives matter was a way to kind of diminish the Black Lives Matter movement and to kind of strip our voices away as a community. And you have to understand that if people of color are still being disproportionately targeted and attacked on a daily basis, that does not mean all lives matter. If people of color are being incarcerated at much higher rates, despite them being much less of a percentage of the population, you have to understand the problem in that, and that all lives matter will truly not be correct until Black Lives Matter. Um, I think we have to start to acknowledge and notice the internal biases, like Jonathan said, that may definitely be unconscious. So saying things like if you're going into a Black neighborhood and you see a Black person and you suddenly feel unsafe, you have to understand that there's a certain prejudice within that statement, and that you have to say, why do I feel this way? Am I really at risk of anything? Because I don't think you are. You have to understand that Black people aren't something that are just like, they're not some like predator that is going to attack you because they think that you're better than them, or that like you have something they want. They just want to be seen as any other person on the street. Um, you also have to learn that as an ally, especially a white ally, you have to do more listening than you do speaking, because at this point in time, you have to learn that it's very important to amplify Black voices instead of diminishing them by trying to make it about you and try to say, oh, I think that like this needs to happen, this needs to happen. Yeah, some of the things you want to happen may need to happen, but you have to understand that something that can work for you and your group may not work for my group. You can start by reading more Black literature, listening to more Black artists, and supporting Black businesses and stuff like that. Um, it's not enough to continually ask the same person to educate you about different experiences that is going on. You, like Jonathan said, you have to continue to go and educate yourself. Like Ariel said, you have to go on the internet, watch different movies like Selma or The 13th to understand why these different institutions were put into place and why people like Black people are being policed so much. And just understand that I'm not a search engine that you can just like go and like type in your phone and ask me multiple questions and I'm gonna sit here and answer them for you. You have to understand that a lot of this has to be done on your own, and I can obviously clarify things if need be, but this has to be something you need to do on your own because I have my own things that I need to take care of. within this movement, and it's also something that's very exhausting, and I can't just spend so much of my time trying to teach you when I should be working on actually getting something done. This is not something that you can just post something about for like one day and then just disappear off the face of the earth. Like I know like once the 25th started and like there was like a really like large momentum and then it just kind of died down. I think this is not something that's like should be treated as like a Black Spirit Week and that we just like, oh yeah, Black Lives Matter for a week and now like I'm just gonna go on my vacations and live my best life. I think that this is something that like you have to understand that people of color have been fighting for their rights for over 400 years, and this is not something that you can look at for a week and think that it doesn't apply to you, because even though you might not necessarily be pushing some of these systems forward, the people, how do I word this? It's just that you have benefited from a system that has always been on your side and that you have never been seen as a target in a way. And things like this can go a long way by participating in different conversations like this, like coming to different community meetings and such, and just listening to young voices, especially that may have not been considered as valuable before. I think that just actively participating in conversations where you do feel uncomfortable and it's okay to experience discomfort in these conversations, it goes a long way in knowing that you are actively putting your foot forward and that you're going to be a part of a change that's so much bigger than yourself and all of us. And it can definitely be very impactful and it's going to be worth it fighting for all this time. And I really hope to see some change, at least within my lifetime. So to just wrap things up, I think that if you want to consider yourselves an ally, you have to do more research. Just keep going on the internet and learn about everything that's going on and just really look into yourself and fight these different microaggressions that you may have towards Black people, towards people of color, and just do your part aside from just posting something or writing a little text. I think you need to go to protest, use your body to protect Black people, and just do more, do better. Thank you.
Oh, good. I'm now unmuted. So I'm gonna speak just briefly. Frankly, I didn't know how to organize this session, so thankfully, Ariel and Jonathan and Jarrett really did most of it for me. And in terms of the Q&A, we thought that we would do is invite people to put sort of questions on the chat board, and then they could sort of collectively discuss them. And having said that, when I get into a situation like this, I just wing it. So we're now winging it, folks. I did get one request from Malika Moomin as to whether she could speak. And I think it would be, totally appropriate to give you the floor. So I appreciate your coming and joining us. And I'd be delighted to have you take the floor for a few minutes and share your point of view.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say about 2 to 3 sentences. Can you guys hear me? Yeah, speaking in relation to what the youth are speaking in reference to about Black Lives Matters and making it matters and having allies of Black people participate and so forth. It's very pertinent to all of our lives together. However, we need to also start digging into the root of some of the problems, because most of the problems that we have allegedly with alleged systematic racism, because I can say in some instances, not all of it, so I wouldn't say the whole system is racist, and people as individuals and groups are racist, but at the same token, I feel that the Black community, the Black families have to learn to be able to handle some of their own problems and in helping our allies and realizing our problems. Because what I saw with the riots, I mean, I thought I was saying that these people are making this up, that stuff wasn't real, because I could not believe all the protesters out there rioting and breaking windows in stores. So what am I saying here? Of course, all lives does matter, because if one of our lives doesn't matter, and we just want to say one group of people matter, that's not right either. So my whole point of asking to speak tonight, and I was going to ask to speak, I did not know that these young people were going to come, is I think like Black people as obviously a separate group of people, just like Caucasians, and then there's brown, and then there's the yellow. Okay, they have a lot of problems, Black people in our communities, amongst ourselves also. So asking our allies to come in to fix our problems, that's not going to fix the problem. This is one of the main reasons why we've been having so many problems, because we're not really, it's a lot of things that is not being revealed about what's really happening. And that is what's hampering the growth. Because you will hear some people say, how many more years is it going to take for this to get fixed, you know? So thank you guys. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much. I just wanted you guys to think about what I'm saying, you know? I think it's so important.
Thank you, Malika.
Yeah.
Now, I'm interested in other people offering questions, and you can put it in the chat, or if you'd like to make a brief statement or you know, and offer a question live, that's also something we could certainly do. Let's see. I actually just want to make one comment in response to what you said, Malika, which I think bears on all of it. And boy, I am. It is an understatement to say I'm not an authority on this subject, but it does occur to me that a way of trying to articulate what's off is that race gets filtered into perceptions, observations, behaviors, interactions, and it gets filtered in a way that puts things on a certain, this is going to be ambiguous, but a certain kind of tilt. And the tilt can be mild or moderate or severe. And I don't think it's irrelevant that race get filtered in some appropriate way. And I don't even know how to articulate what I'm saying beyond saying, but it's very clear that in many respects, race gets filtered in a way that's more beyond inappropriate and very disturbing. And I'm going to claim, you know, guilty myself. I mean, I won't bore you with the highlights of where I think I was off on race until we get into drinking after the session. But absolutely, I've made some mistakes. And I want to be quiet now and invite others to offer comments. Rami, would you like to make a comment? You've had some thoughts on the subject. I'd like to invite you if you care to make a comment or two. Rami, I want to introduce Rami briefly. Rami has been our most loyal participant in the youth and education meetings. I believe you said you're a rising junior, and I'm not going to embarrass Rami by how insightful I think he is, but I do think he's pretty insightful. So Rami, tell us what thoughts you have in mind.
Well, with regards to race, my school is majority white, and it's not proportional to any of the city relationships between minorities and white people, which I find is concerning. I think my school should represent what the city represents as a whole. But I think the most important thing to think about when we think of race, one of the most important things to think about when we think of race is just looking back historically at what minority groups have gone through, from slavery to the civil rights movement to the Holocaust. All of those things were systematic. And I feel like when we have to look and solve any problem, you just have to look in the past where someone has solved it before. And well, racism is nothing new. There's been racism since the dawn of time when groups started moving from continent to continent. But the way people have handled racism has been different, from Martin Luther King's nonviolent tactics to the Black Panther Party's other tactics. But I think that whenever you, as a leader, whenever your group is going through something that that is race related, or you have an incident, you should look to the past. And I think that is one of the most helpful things anyone can do, to see what have others done and how can I replicate their success and move around their failures, or think of a new way to work around that problem that others have solved before you. And that's just how I tend to approach things. But you guys were great speakers, and I really enjoyed listening to you. And I hope others really take your advice into account when they do think of their own racism and their own prejudices that everybody has.
Could I say something else? I wanted to just say a little response and stuff like that. I think that people have to understand that things like the protests and the riots and stuff were historically what have just been able to create great change, like things like the Stonewall riots and the civil rights movement and stuff like that. Those were even suffrage and stuff like that, they were headed by Black people as well. And even the Stonewall riots by Black trans women. We have to understand that people of color have been down and have been constantly fighting for other people's rights for a long time. And I do understand that there are a lot of problems within the Black community with things like colorism and stuff like that, people lighter Black people being considered as more pretty than my darker skinned brothers and stuff like that. I understand that there are problems within the community. I just think that something like All Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter, it's not something to really be taking to be how do I word it? I think that this is not something to kind of use the Black people, our problems, as something to diminish. I don't know how to word it. But what I'm trying to say is that all lives matter needing to be possible. If Black Lives Matter happen, you have to understand that being an ally, we can't look at the Black Lives Matter movement as something to and our problems to be something that's oh, I don't want to help them because they have their own problems. I think that this is something very to the side, if that makes sense. It's really hard to put it into words, but we're asking people to be our allies because our lives matter, and that we shouldn't be attacked for our color. We shouldn't be disproportionately affected and incarcerated and targeted by police because of our color. I understand that we have problems within the community, but that shouldn't take away from the fact that our lives still matter at the end of the day. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
I'm going to invite anyone to sort of raise their hand and speak, but I'll make one comment as we sort of transition. This notion, there's something that I have been grappling with about the relationship between the phrase Black Lives Matter and the phrase All Lives Matter. And I like you, Jared, I'm going to try to be articulate about it. I'm not going to be very good at it. I think both are true, but both are actually making a different kind of statement that is not the same statement, and both are important and different statements. I raised it in part because actually something I'm very fond of, and one of the people that inspires me is a woman named Bertha Lewis, who was the last head of ACORN, for those who remember that organization, which was very actively involved in community organizing and getting out, enrolling people, Black and minority people for voting, and actually got torpedoed by an ugly situation with an organization called Breitbart, which we don't have to delve into. But Bertha Lewis, I'm going to say what this is crazy, but I'm going to say it anyway. If I were a billionaire, Bertha Lewis would already have been on stage, or somebody representing her would have been on stage, because her life story is so interesting. But I noticed in interacting with her circle of people who are largely Black and perhaps brown and a few white, that the notion of saying all lives matter was actually not acceptable, because it seemed like it was it was denying the reality and the truth and the importance of the phrase Black Lives Matter. I'm going to try to be quiet, but Jared, do you have a thought?
Yeah, I think that like I said before, that All Lives Matter was kind of made as a way to diminish the Black Lives Matter movement and to kind of say that, oh yeah, like why are we focusing on this one group of people when all lives should matter? But you have to understand that if Black lives don't matter, then all lives matter just isn't true. And like you can't say that all lives matter and then not actively be working to help the Black community be seen as on the same level as white people.
Yeah, to build off what Jarrett was saying, all lives matter is kind of, it's a retort that's just not true, because right now and historically to a lot of systems in our society, Black lives haven't mattered. And the Black Lives Matter movement is asserting that, yes, of course, Black lives do matter. So saying all lives matter is just not true, because right now, to our society, to a large extent, Black lives don't matter. When Black people are killed by the police and then those police are not even indicted, let alone convicted, that shows that to like systems within our society, Black lives haven't mattered. So saying all lives matter is just not true, because all lives won't matter until Black lives matter. So I think that's the relationship, as far as I see it, the relationship between those two phrases.
Yeah, I agree completely, especially in regards to the fact that the phrase all lives matter was only made a phrase once Black Lives Matter was a phrase. It was mostly in counterpoint, in objection to the phrase Black Lives Matter. And I feel like what's more accurate is that all lives should matter, but all lives don't. Black lives don't. Many Black people aren't being told their worth by society, especially with a lot of racist institutions like education. Like the education system is very, very prejudiced, even under the surface. For example, LaGuardia, it's a very liberal school, but there's a lot of racism that goes on that many people a lot of people aren't aware of. And most importantly, all lives matter, the phrase was mostly used to, like Jared said, diminish the Black Lives Matter movement. Black Lives Matter isn't saying that all other races don't matter. It's just saying that we aren't told that we matter. We aren't mattering to society as a whole. We aren't, our lives aren't being valued as those of other people. And that's completely ridiculous. And that's the reason why we're fighting. That's the reason why we're protesting, why we're rallying up, why we're constantly trying to, it's kind of sad that we have to remind people that our lives matter, not that Black lives do matter. And like all lives matter is it's a very broad statement that as a whole just isn't true in regards to that.
Oh, can we have Justin speak?
Yeah, Justin had a question and I want to unmute him.
Hi, everyone.
Brian?
For those who haven't met me, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
My name is Justin Moffat. I am a resident here on the Upper East Side at 81st in New York. And I'm a lawyer and activist. I'm one of the organizers of the vigil that's been going on in Carl Schurz Park. If you've heard about that, that's at 86th and Easton Avenue. Thank you, Billy, for telling me about this get together. It's been really encouraging to hear from like Jonathan and Jarrett and Rami. It's really encouraging because I grew up in the South and we weren't having these conversations, at least not widely, not within our like political community. The kind of rhetoric I was fighting and up against was heritage, not hate, pride, not prejudice. Basically my friends rationalizing and justifying their display of the Confederate flag in their at campus, in their lockers, or in their bunks, or their cars, or their bedrooms or dorm rooms. So it's nice to hear the conversations that you're having in your schools. So my question was, I wanted to hear a little bit more about, do you feel as though the curricula, the classes that are being offered at LaGuardia, or maybe at other public schools here in the city based off of your friends' experiences, are really capturing these histories that you obviously are learning on your own, whether you have access to civics courses that teach you about the operations of government and the things that really matter on the ground. And then beyond that, I wanted to know how supportive school administrators have been in your activism, both inside and outside of school. And lastly, if I may offer just words of wisdom, it's that though I'm like obviously highly encouraged by your activism, I just hope you come to learn that this is absolutely a marathon and not a sprint. And you have to pace yourself, because sadly, these issues aren't going to go away anytime soon. And we need voices like yours, articulate voices, voices that have studied history and understand the issues of being an ally. We need those voices 10 years from now. And I just don't want you guys to burn out. So just keep that in mind.
I think I can start answering some of your questions. I think that in terms of like the curriculum and stuff like that, like we all know that like just from the beginning of time, anything history related in general has just been extremely whitewashed. They're like, okay, the biggest history lesson that you have on your own culture is how you guys became slaves, had a civil rights movement, and that's it. Like we don't get any like type of like Africana studies unless that's like something we're majoring in college. Like that's not something we learn about in our regular like elementary, middle school, high school. And it's a lot of like self-education at that point, and also just having like your parents teach you about your own culture and stuff like that. Like me, as like I consider myself African American, so I'm not like from like Africa and stuff like that. Like I don't have that like heritage and like that like experiences and stuff. So like I had to learn about like my like brothers and sisters from them and stuff like that. Like there's nothing like strictly put into the curriculum that allows me to learn about where I came from as a Black person. In terms of the school, I think the school has been, at least from my point of view, they have been very proactive during this time. Like I've been asked to speak at many different conferences and stuff. Like I spoke with the faculty, me, Jonathan, and Ariel, we all spoke at the town hall and stuff like that. So we've definitely been offered many many opportunities to speak out about everything going on and to have our voices be heard. I just think that this has to be something that's like definitely implemented even like past us. Like we're going to college and stuff like that. So we're obviously going to have different experiences. I think that the future kids, like the future seniors and stuff like that, and all the different kids going to into the schooling system, just they need to know that they have a much more they need to like have a better support system than we have. I think that people need to have more people who look like them in like the guidance department and just like in positions of power, because it's like it's hard to really confide in someone in your school when they don't look like you and they won't understand where you're coming from, and they think that they know what's best for you, but everybody has a different like learning curve and also just like a different way of communicating their feelings. And to have someone who doesn't understand that and who offers them something that's not going to help them, it makes you less trustworthy towards these authority figures, and you're not gonna really make it anywhere. So I think that like even though the school is offering us different opportunities to speak out, I think that this is a much larger conversation that needs to happen even after we leave high school.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's a very, like us talking is obviously a big stepping point, and us having a platform to speak at school is obviously a big stepping point. But it's much larger than us. It's much larger than just the students. It's much larger than just the teachers and just the guidance counselors and just administration. For example, with me, both of my parents are Jamaican, so I have Afro-Caribbean heritage, and coming from middle school to high school, I really haven't learned anything other than the fact that my ancestors were slaves and worked on sugar plantations, like nothing. Like I'm very proactive in asking my mom, but obviously she doesn't know like everything. But there's been no official teaching space for me to learn about my history and about the history of my family members and the people before me and the people who came before them. And there's no like history, like Jared said, is very whitewashed. It comes from a bunch, like mainly the people who wrote history were white, and much of it comes from their perspective, not the perspectives of people of color. So I feel like, especially in the school system, because I feel like a lot of it is education, a lot of it is not having a space, a learning environment to learn about the experiences of people of color and for the people of color themselves, like me, to learn about my history, to learn about our history is very important, and it's very essential into just changing and progressing in the world that we live in.
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely with what both Jarrett and Ariel said. The curriculum that we learn, especially in history, is very whitewashed. And I don't think I've ever been in a non-majority white school. It's both what we're learning and the environment we're learning in. The New York City is what I think the most segregated education system in the entire country. This isn't like, it's New York, supposedly liberal New York City is the most segregated school system in the entire country. And we learn about slavery, and we learn about the civil rights movement, like Jarrett said, and that's pretty much it. I never learned what Juneteenth was from school. That was never something that was taught in a history class. That's something I found out on my own on the internet just a few years ago. The curriculum we have is so Eurocentric and white-centric, I think, and that's not an indictment of LaGuardia, that's an indictment of the entire nationwide education system, especially the AP curriculum. In AP US history, I'm pretty sure so you learn a lot from primary source documents. I'm pretty sure the statistic is that only one primary source document in the AP US history curriculum is actually written by a Black person. It's just a staggering statistic considering how much Black history, how much African history there is. So I think it's completely true that the education system is, especially the history curriculum, is very whitewashed. And I think that's something that really needs to be fixed.
I see. Thank you all. I see that Rami would like to speak, but Brian had a particular issue he wanted to raise. So Brian, I'd like to invite you if you'd like to take a minute and pose your question. I think you have to unmute yourself or Will has to unmute you. Both.
Should be good.
Are you good? Can we hear you? No.
Oh. Sorry.
There it is. Okay. So yeah, first I want to say to the three speakers is, thank you for coming tonight. And keep doing what you're doing, keep speaking out in these town halls, keep, making the voices heard. So I recently, obviously, with all this stuff that was brought to light with the George Floyd incident, I recently actually got into a little bit of a heated argument with a friend of mine on social media. Her take on it was, and I'm gonna share the story, and then I'm gonna give you the anecdote around it. So her thing was, she shared this article about George Floyd, and it was a piece by People magazine. And my first thing to her was like, if you can't tell the difference between a news source and actually an opinion piece, then you really shouldn't be sharing information on social media. Like you're sharing fake news. So it was a first account for somebody that knew George Floyd, and basically, you know, telling all the good that he did in his life, you know, from in the community to his, you know, his kids that he, you know, was raising his kids. And, you know, her message when she shared this article on Facebook was, you know, people are treating this guy like he's a saint and like he's a martyr. And yeah, what happened to him was really bad, but he was an awful person, and he held a woman at, you know, gunpoint that was pregnant, and he was on drugs, you know, allegedly when he was, anyway. So I started this thread with her, and I wasn't the only one that was kind of going back and forth with her. I'm like, I think you're missing the point, both of the article, you know, and of what's going on in the place. You know, George Floyd died. You know, he died unjustly, and it wasn't right. And you know, this, first of all, this account is, I read more like an obituary. It's somebody that was close to him that was sharing the good he did in his life. You know, certainly when I die, I don't want somebody to be writing all the bad things that I did, you know, in my life. And I said the second thing is that, you know, he's not even like a part of the picture anymore. He was just the action that brought the topic back up to, you know, to the forefront. So I share that, and anyway, we ended up going back and forth. It was like, after like 8 exchanges, I'm like, all right, I'm not going to convince her. She's not going to convince me. So, you know, I just stopped at that point. We're still friends since then. My question really leads both. Because I'm originally not from this country. I'm an immigrant to America as well too, from Western Europe, and I was so proud at, you know, what BLM did, what, you know, the issue of George Floyd and how it really took off, you know, internationally and worldwide, that, you know, the country that I'm from, you know, they were actually having thousands protesting in the streets of in Portugal, where I'm from. And that was a big moment for me. So my question really is, how do we measure both progress individually and as a group? And by as a group, I mean the people that I influence, that I try to bring about change to. How do we measure progress in both?
I think so the first point you brought up about that argument you had with a friend, I actually had the exact same argument about the exact same article. A really close friend of mine said, I saw this video where this woman was talking about all the horrible things that George Floyd did in his life. And my initial like response was anger, because it was so ridiculous to me that she was saying this to me. And like the argument got really heated. And then I kind of like came back a few hours later, like less angry, and talked about it with her. And after like an hour-long conversation, I actually noticed some kind of change in her point of view. So like a lesson I learned from that is you're never gonna win someone to the right side by yelling at them. It was just interesting because I had the exact same argument. But in terms of measuring progress, I mean, there's been, in just the last month, a massive change in the public opinion on the issue of racism and support for Black Lives Matter. Like, I think it was 5 years ago, it was a clear minority of the country that was in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. And now it's a pretty vast majority. We've seen just in the past month, because of this collective outrage and this collective action, there has been really, I think, massive progress. And in Minneapolis, they're dismantling their entire police force and starting from scratch. And they say they're going to radically rethink the way they do, the way that they deal with public safety. So I think there are clear milestones that progress is already occurring. And I think that's a good way of, it's harder on an individual basis to measure progress, because there's so many people with so many different views. But as a society, I think there are already clear, I don't know what the right word is, but signs that progress is happening right now.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, you know, more locally, obviously the repeal of the 50A amendment was big for New York State. This, you know, argument and counter argument regarding defund the police and what that means, you know, if anybody really defines what that means. I mean, I know what it means and I know what people are trying to say, but obviously the counter argument is like this negative thing, like, oh, if you have somebody that, you know, breaks into your house, you know, call social services, don't call, you know, 911. It's ridiculous, but anyway. So.
Also, just going back to the first part of what you said, I've also found a lot of people, especially in regards to George Floyd, because I'm very in the comment section of a lot of posts and so on and so forth. A lot of people are saying, like what you said, like how he held a pregnant woman at gunpoint, how he was on drugs, and I just wanted to point out that none of that makes what, even if it happened or not, none of that makes the way that he died any valid, or in any way, shape, or form, because the police didn't know that when he was murdered. They just know that he was a Black man and that he was giving a counterfeit check. And additionally, like, even if that was valid, which it isn't, this is a much bigger movement than George Floyd. Yes, George Floyd was the one who his death was the one that stirred all the protests currently, but this is for much more people than just George Floyd. This is for Sandra Bland. This is for Tamir Rice. This is for Trayvon Martin. This is for Tatiana Jefferson. This is for Breonna Taylor. This is for all the Black men, women, and non-binary people, all the Black LGBT people, all the Black members of the LGBT community, all the Black people who, once they go outside, they immediately feel threatened by the entire structure of racism, by which even comes in small forms, like we were discussing before, with not enough teachers who are people of color, not enough leaders who are people of color, but also within police brutality, because the entire structure of the police was created once slavery ended, to bring Black people in check, so to speak. Because once slavery ended, forced labor wasn't allowed, except in the case of one's incarceration, which led to over-policing of Black communities, and which is a response to a lot of what I'm saying, a lot of what I'm hearing of a lot of people saying, how come Black people are a minority of the US population, but are committing more than half the crimes? Well, if a particular neighborhood is being over-policed, there are going to be more incarceration. There are also Black people in the criminal justice system who are serving much lengthier much lengthier sentences than those for white people who have committed the same crime. For example, I saw this comparison. I don't know the exact one, but I believe like the statistics were the same. Like they committed the same crime. They were about similar in age. Like everything was the same, except one person was Black and one person was white. The Black person got around 6 years in prison. The white person got around 2 years in prison with probation. And so, like, it's a much bigger issue than just George Floyd, than just one person. A lot of people aren't realizing that it's not just one person that we're fighting for. It's not just it's not just a tiny group of people that we're fighting for. We're fighting for a massive, the entirety of Black people. We're fighting for our voices to be heard. We're fighting for our rights to be listened to. And I've also found that a lot of, especially due to the immense pressure that's come with the recent rallying and the recent riots and the recent protests, like Jonathan said, it has led to a lot of change in a quicker pace than it would have if these riots and protests weren't have going on. For example, with I believe they passed Breonna's law, which banned no-knock warrants. There's a more strict, at least in New York City, law in regards to chokeholds. Like there's a lot of protests, at least on a lot of progress, at least on the legal and government space and legislative standpoint. But there are also a lot of people that while, like Jonathan said, there has been a much bigger amount of people in support of the Black Lives Matter movement, there's also a lot of people who aren't, and that's who we're trying to, like, the entire movement is geared towards and is trying to reach out to.
Right. Rami, did you have a comment that you wanted to make?
Yeah, but it's kind of off topic now.
Oh, well, let me pause for a second and see if someone feels they have a comment or something that's closer to where this conversation is. You have at least 3 seconds to this. Oh, Billy, go ahead.
I just first want to thank Jonathan and Jared and Ariel, because you are all so impressive. And I've heard a lot of adults speak on this topic, but I've learned probably more from this conversation than most that I've listened to. So keep up the amazing work. I echo everything Justin said earlier. You're all phenomenal. And I'm excited to see where your leadership continues. Ariel said something, and I think Jared then later echoed it, which is this can't just be about a hashtag in a moment. We can say Black Lives Matter, and that's true. We need to keep saying that. But we have to turn our words into action, and we also have to take action that doesn't just last during a moment of protest, right? It's got to be sustained. Because I remember the summer of 2014 when Michael Brown was murdered, and we all, were rightfully outraged. Well, I shouldn't say we all, but a lot of us were outraged. And then I look back and kind of what came of it. We had maybe some minor reforms, but did we really take seriously the racial injustice in this country? Did we take seriously not just on criminal justice, but I think, Jonathan, you made the point, and let's keep making it. We are the most segregated school system in the country here in New York. Or how about, talking about things I never learned in high school. No one taught me about redlining. No one told me that we had slavery and Jim Crow, but no one told me that even in the government sanctioned policy of concentrating wealth in white neighborhoods. So we got to keep talking about these things. And so my question is to build off Ariel's point. How do we make sure this isn't just a in the moment hashtag, a flash in the pan? What can we do? And let me ask it in 2 ways. What can we do as a community board at our level to make sure that we have a sustained conversation for months and years to come on racial justice? And what should we be doing as a city? What's your advice to city leaders on how to make sure we don't lose sight of this, that we don't let this moment pass, that we have a sustained effort at dismantling these racist structures? So thank you all.
I think that just first off, that a big thing is to just continue to allow and have different spaces and opportunities to speak about this, because I know that like a lot of people might not necessarily be like, okay, like I have these feelings, but like I don't have it. Like giving them an outlet to be able to express their feelings and to be able to kind of institute change and like give suggestions and stuff like that is very important. So that so in the community boards and just having like open forums for conversation so that we can like get our thoughts out and have like an actual productive conversation where we can try to like throw out ideas about how to bring change about. It's very important. And then for those community boards who might have a closer connection to the bigger city and the bigger picture, they can bring those discussions and those ideas and just try to get it implemented on a bigger level, being that they have that platform and the ability to get that passed on.
I agree.
Oh, go ahead.
I agree completely, especially with even meetings like these, like continuing to give a platform to Black people to speak on their experiences and speak on what needs to change, and listening to what Black people feel is essential in creating change. Like especially in meetings like these and meetings like the LaGuardia Town Hall is very essential into creating change, especially from a community board level. And like you said, changing from just talk into actual action steps, and relaying the experiences of Black people to the larger community.
I think our education system is the most important place to focus. And with the segregated school system and with all of that, I think one place to start would be looking at organizations that write our curriculum, looking at Pearson and all the big monopolies that have state contracts. That's the same thing we did even with Ben Kalos in our district. He saw that our New York farmers weren't getting contracts to fulfill school orders, and he changed that. And New York saved a ton of money, and we got better food from New York. I think looking at the contracts that we have for Pearson, for the College Board, for ACT.com, looking at what they mandate teachers to teach, how we can change them, or say, we're not going to renew your contract unless you put more African American studies in, or unless you represent more of the LGBTQ community. A teacher that's really had an enormous impact on my life did make an effort to go out of his way to teach about race and race relations in America. And he taught us about the redlining and the government study and all that, and how it was leaked, which was an amazing lesson, which I'll never forget. But he sacrificed a day, 2 days of class because that he had to prep us for our exams, and which reflected poorly on him, but the benefit for us was greater. But yet we lost days of material. But why not get rid of some kinds of studies, or move faster through periods of history, and really focus on instances throughout our history, like Juneteenth, the Stonewall riots, all of that. And that's one way. And Peter knows how much I hate the College Board. And then another way is just looking at who we hire as a teacher, and who we hire. And this principle goes for any profession, but teachers and cops are the two professions this has been studied in. In Norway, they were ranked the number like 200 and something in the world in education a couple of years ago. They fundamentally changed who they hired as a teacher. They hired very well-educated people. They hired very smart people, and they hired people that were very open-minded and young people that could really make change. So their ranking shot up to, they're number 1 or 2 now in the world for highest level of education. The United States is not, I don't even think it's in the top 10 anymore for education. Doing this, and if you look at who we hire as a police officer, who we hire as doctors and nurses, looking at all of those people, saying it's better prepared for this job. Like, who can we hire to make this job more prestigious? Because every job can be prestigious. It just depends who you put in it. So also having the city government look at laws. I was shocked to find out that chokeholds were legal in the first place. That's like not having a law against murder. That, like, stuff like that should not be in our legal system, or laws that explicitly say that is allowed. So just looking at what we have, and the city government, I have to say, has been doing a pretty good job looking at our laws. 11 law, between city and state, I think 11 laws are either on the table or have been passed, which I think is great progress. But just continuing to look at that, and even into the next election cycle, having everybody in the system look at just rules in the bureaucracy, not even laws, just like racial profiling and all that, just all of that, a small change or a small policy change or a small memo being sent out can have huge implications when they're all added together.
Thank you, Robbie. We're coming close to closure. So I definitely want to open up the floor. If there's anyone who hasn't spoken, who would like to speak or offer a particular thought or share, the floor is open and the mic is waiting.
I mean, one last thing I could touch on.
Please, parting shots. Yes, Jonathan.
I think something that's become abundantly clear in the past month is that people power works. People have been out in the streets protesting, and real change has been accomplished. So I think that's just something, I think that's a really important take from this, that protesting works. Standing out there and making sure your voice is heard, it has yielded effects, really powerful effects in the past month. So just to make sure that we don't lose that momentum, that we're always, if we need to be, out in the streets, making sure that we're fighting for a more just and more fair society, and taking it to our elected officials, putting the pressure on them, showing them that we're the ones in charge. We elect you, so you need to work for us. I think that's something that's become really clear to me in the past month.
Other parting shots from, yes, please, Justin.
I was debating whether or not I wanted to return to this or even address it when it was going on, because I wanted to hear the high schoolers address it first, but I couldn't let it go unsaid. The All Lives Matter, I just wanted to clarify something. Beyond it not realizing that Black Lives Matter has to be accepted first as a premise before All Lives Matter is a true statement, as someone who has walked the streets of the Upper East Side and has been yelled at All Lives Matter as an act of aggression, not as a true debate of ideas, you have to think who is saying it and why. I agree with, of course, Ariel, I'm sorry, I didn't, thank you for speaking before I forgot to mention your name, but thank you again for speaking and being a part of this. What you said was absolutely right, and others have said it before, it's being used to dismiss Black voices, but as you guys have all mentioned, history is intersectional, and if we look at who's saying All Lives Matter, have they consistently said that throughout time? Have they said that about women? Have they said that about Jewish Americans? Have they said that about immigrants? Have they said that about LGBT folks? They're only able to say All Lives Matter in 2020 because progressives and Democrats and liberals and people who have expanded the discourse around rights and dignity have stood up for other people who are marginalized. So the idea that All Lives Matter is a viable argument is predicated on the very work that people like you, your high schoolers and college students and other advocates, the work that you guys are doing on the ground. So again, I thank you all for doing what you're doing, because it's so important, and I just hope that you see that what you're doing matters and it will matter even in 10 and 20 years. And the people who are your detractors now will be your friends in 20 years and try to use and try to forget all of the points of advocacy that they tried to lodge against you today. So that's why I said it's a marathon, not a sprint, because it's cyclical. It will come back. And luckily, you guys are advocating for the right side of history on this one. So,
well, thank you, Justin. Thank you, Ariel. Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you, Jarrett. I shall not forget this session, and I will follow up with my new friends here and let you know a little bit of sort of what kind of impacts. But I will share my number one takeaway was where you started, which was be active, not passive. Thank you. Thank you for the encouragement. Thank you for the leadership. Thank you for the inspiration. And thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Applaud for all of our participants. Yes, thank you all. Thank you, Julia, even though you were quiet. All right. Good night, all. Thank you.
All right. Great job. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.